Hi. As I suspected, and many other people alongside, this whole thing, this pandemic scare, is a scam. And as the evidence shows today, and this is from UK Column, so please check out UK Column, because this video, I'm going to leave you the link to it, shares a lot of information, and I must say hats off to them. Yet again, they've proven to be the best news source. I know that there's disagreement between people like myself and the Brexit thing, with some groups, alternative news providers. I understand where they're coming from, and I personally always felt that the way we entered the EU was very underhand, and well, it was corrupt from the start actually, and it did cost us very dearly. The only thing that I have against Brexit is that we are leaving the EU a much poorer country in every way imaginable than we were when we entered it, and that is a deep concern to me. And the fact that the only alternative on the table is food from America in return for us dropping all our health and safety regulations and letting them have our NHS, and us being under total corporate control under a government that wants to scrap our human rights. A lot of the rights that we had before we even entered the EU, a lot of the rights that were created actually by British people and were later on taken up by the EU, established within the EU Union. I've got a lot of problems with the EU, the way it runs, what's going on there, but I am solid with the people of the EU who are standing up for their human rights and utilising the rights that they have. Like, for example, in France, they've utilised a lot of the laws, EU laws, to ban fracking. That is because of the people pushing the government, and that's my one big, huge gripe with the British people, is that collectively we fail to hold the government to account. We fail to utilise our laws and rights, and it's a source of despair for me. It is a source of depression, because, you know, rights are like muscles. If you don't use them, you will get weaker and weaker and weaker, until eventually you have no power, no strength, because the rights are, well, they're just a myth, aren't they? They've faded into the shadows, these human rights, because you've let them slip, and now it's like, well, you know, who cares? Because, you know, according to human rights, there should not be one single homeless person on the streets of Britain. Now, we've seen with the pandemic that, oh, suddenly all the homeless people in London can be housed. Suddenly, it's important to get them off the streets because there's a lockdown, so they're not allowed to be on the streets. But their human rights state that they're not allowed to be homeless. Because, you know, where can they provide their own shelter? They haven't got that choice. It's been robbed of us. Every creature born on this planet has a right to build itself a little home, and that includes us human beings. Now, when did we lose that right? I've been sharing a lot of links recently of tiny houses. I mean, I'm not saying everybody should live in a tiny house, but it's like, why? We have the capabilities to build our own homes, to live within nature, to live ecologically, to live eco-friendly. It's what most people would like to do, but we're enslaved to this system, and then they're telling us there's too many of us and it's our fault that the planet's being destroyed, when actually it isn't. Millions upon millions of people lived in all of the Americas, South America, North America, millions, for thousands and thousands of years. They did not damage the environment. They did not cause major pollution. This is something unique to our culture, this alleged culture that has been imposed on us for over 1,000 years now. And, you know, it does all stem from Christianity and the way it was interpreted and who usurped it and the powers they gave themselves on the strength of it. And it does fundamentally rely on stripping women and children of all their rights, of which we've only got a tiny amount back. And, you know, we're now in a culture where, well, apparently elderly people are a nuisance. They're living too long. You know, they're a burden. These are people that have worked for this country, that have contributed all their lives, that carry living history. Is that what they're scared of, the powers that be today? What the elderly people know, what they can pass on to their children. They want to cut that link. That is a very serious threat, you know, and it is a serious threat. People need to take this very, very, very seriously, okay? When we have a woman like this, who's director of the International Monetary Fund, writing a memo like this, I'll leave you the link, I've shared it before, read it, please read it. But right from the start, you know, that's the gist of it. Old people live too long and this is a risk for the global economy. We must do something urgently. This was in 2018. This is what was discussed at Davos in 2018. And then we've got people like Bill Gates who, you know, are promoting vaccines as part of population control. So what's going on now? Apparently Israel is developing a vaccine. You know, what exactly is going to be in this vaccine? Are they going to force us to have it? Are we going to get some kind of mark on our hand to show that we've had the vaccine? So otherwise we're going to be refused access to the NHS, or we won't be allowed in certain shops or clubs or whatever. Is this what is going on? When Boris Johnson talks about the herd, who talks about a population of human beings as a herd? Only people that are part of a party that refer to the British public as stock. Stock! Ian Duncan Smith on national TV at a tribunal referred to us all as stock. But look at, you know, and now they're giving themselves all kinds of powers. I've got us under house arrest in our homes. As I've repeatedly stated, go through my Twitter right from the start. House arrest. That's what we're under. House arrest. And now they're threatening military action because people aren't standing far apart enough from each other to stop us from protesting at what's happened with this banking collapse. That is what is going on, is the banking collapse. That was coming. They knew it was coming. What were they going to do? They planned everything. They planned these things years in advance. We have known for the last 5 years how bad the market has been getting. Anybody who's been paying any attention whatsoever outside of the mainstream garbage knew that there was a serious financial global crisis coming. And I'll leave you some of the links to prove that. So let's say that we didn't have this coronavirus scare. Let's just say the bank suddenly crashed again and millions of people as a result lost their jobs overnight. And then the government comes along. The government that has been telling us for the last 10 years, oh, they've got no money. They've got no money for social security. They've got no money for healthcare. They've got no money for the NHS. They've got no money for carers. Everybody's got to have this third of their income cut. Because we've got this huge debt. And because we bailed out the banks in 2008. And we've got this huge debt. There's been this terrible global financial crash. And we've got to balance the books now. We've got to tighten our belts. But then suddenly, after all the money that they had out of us, that Britain's still paying actually £50 million a week. £50 million a week interest on the what is it, £1.27 trillion debt that we have now accumulated since this banking crash. And what have they done in the interim with all that money? What has happened? The only thing that's happened is that the rich have got even richer. We have got very, very much poorer. They're still carrying on with their same evil industries that are destroying the planet against our wishes, forcing us to live in according to their dictates and their produce, and even work for them and produce those things, because people can't walk out of the job and lose their home. And especially not in a situation where they've got no social security to fall back on. So that people can't say, well, I choose to live in austerity on a state benefit rather than work for a company that is manufacturing crap that is destroying our planet or damaging our health. So we're slaves. That's a slave when you've got no choice. And that was the whole reason why social security was established. Because in a financial system where people haven't got the ability to go out and build their own little home and live on subsistence level, as was always our right in Britain until the Enclosure Acts, and that's what post-World War II Britain tried to rectify, was that imbalance that was created by enclosure when people were denied their universal God-given right to social security in terms of building their own little house and living off their common lands. That's the difference between a slave and a free man. And that's why I support a lot of the things that the best of the Brexit supporters do actually support. I do support those things, you know. I'm not like just totally in love with the EU as an entity in terms of its governance, but I am in love with the EU in terms of the unity of the people and our ability to provide for each other fairly and to pay attention to the health and safety, to our environment. You know, there are a lot of good things within the EU that Britain as a nation, either independently or part of the EU, ought to be upholding, like, for example, Norway. So, you know, this whole agenda that they have, which is a depopulation agenda, and again, you know, this could turn really bad. They could actually just be killing people off and telling us they're dying of Covid-19. We're in a very dangerous situation with very dangerous people. We're talking about people that orchestrated 9/11 and then gave themselves powers to go and invade how many Middle Eastern countries now. Just look at the havoc that they've wreaked across the Middle East and the rise of ISIS. They haven't, this war on terror has done nothing but increase terror. These are the kind of people that our children's lives are in their hands. The kind of people that, you know, are part of Epstein's circle. That were involved in, you know, what's come out about Epstein is, it's literally scratching the surface of what was going on there and what has been going on in this world with our children. You know, and I do refer to it extensively in the document calling for a class action against this government. And I am asking for damages, because Brexit, again, is another scam, you see. And like I say, whether people support Brexit or not, whether we're in the EU or out of the EU, we should not be leaving the EU with nothing. Not even, you know, when we entered the EU, we were producing our own shoes, our own clothing. We were a productive nation. Now it's been all transported to China. So we've got nothing. They've got no real jobs to offer us. No jobs really of value that give people a sense of self-worth. They're mostly jobs that people hate. And a lot of people that are there by vocation are hating their jobs because they're overworked. They're overworked and underpaid. There's no joy. Where is the joy? And that's what it's all about. It's robbing us of our joy so they can have their joy, you see. And in this article, I picked up on that word that was used here, and it's called Schadenfreude. It's a German word. It's about joy of witnessing people suffering. We suggest that as inequality rises, you divert attention from class envy to age-related Schadenfreude, pitting generation against generation, divide and rule. Look, you know, I mean, I know people find me over-passionate. I'm sorry, when you've lived, I've lived my life, my experiences, and with what I know and understand, and I look at the level of awareness around me, it's incredible, and that scares me. That scares me that people are so blind. They're so blinkered. As if this world that is the creation of these crazy people, and they are crazy. Their ideas are crazy. Even their projections into the future are crazy. They have these conferences predicting that, oh, in so many years there's going to be this many billion people and this many billion people. And, you know, it's... Sorry, they are so messed up because they don't take everything into account, you see. And that's what intelligence does. That's what universal law is all about. Taking everything into account. It's when you take everything into account, then you come at a balanced picture. Then you get a clear picture of what is going on. And the clear picture is when you take everything into account that there are not too many people on Earth at all, not by a long chalk, and that we can live sustainably and we can actually improve the natural environment and our planet. They want to kill us all off. And the only reason why is because they know very well that in order to utilise and improve life on our planet and improve life for humanity in real terms, they will have to lose their power and wealth. And they don't like it. They enjoy abusing our children. And how do they get their hands on children? How does anybody get their hands on a human child to abuse, to treat like a toy for their Schadenfreude? How? Put people in poverty. Confuse them. Pit them against each other. Make life difficult. In fact, children are a nuisance and a burden. Make parents actually regret bringing a child into the world. Make this world such a bad place that millions of women every year after giving birth are suffering with depression. The kind of depression that drives many of them to suicide. Or the social services will come in and take the baby off them and earn a profit in the process. That's what's happening. And that scares me that nobody's taking much notice of that. Now, very recently, Will Wong made a video about ritual abuse of children. Again, that nobody's... Oh, you know, it doesn't really happen. It's a mess. You know, we're talking about sadistic abuse of children. Of course, people who operate on that principle of, you know, Schadenfreude, joy. Look the word up yourself. It's joy at other people's suffering. Self-satisfaction even. Oh, well, I'm all right. It's something that I have always... It's always disgusted me throughout my life when I've gone through periods of deep depression and struggling with complex PTSD, and people have said, oh, but you know, you're so lucky, you know, when you have to look at what you've got, you know, compared to other people. There's always somebody worse off than you. And it's that mentality of encouraging people, like, you know, look, be happy that you aren't in their situation. That's Schadenfreude. That's part of, that comes into the interpretation of this word. But in its deeper form, we are referring to sadism, where people actually get pleasure from abusing and hurting people, and that the more they make somebody suffer, the more pleasure they actually derive from it. And we've witnessed it from this Tory party, when they all cheered and in a big roar of joy because they won the vote against nurses' pay rises, NHS staff pay rises. They whooped for joy. They roared, "Hey!" Knowing that they were forcing people to do one of the most difficult jobs in Britain, is dealing with the sick and the dying. And they've increased the workload on them by fourfold, and actually reduced their wages in real terms. And hundreds of nurses have been committing suicide. I'll leave you the links to these facts. Hundreds of doctors, hundreds of NHS doctors and nurses have been committing suicide. And last night, everybody's clapping on the street for the NHS. Oh, and key workers in brackets, which whatever key workers actually refers to. To me, it would refer to the refuse collectors, the postman, the police, the shop assistants, the bus drivers and taxi drivers. Suddenly we're giving them a clap, when apparently we've all just voted for a government that for the last 10 years has done nothing but stamp on these people. And now we're giving them a clap because we've been told there's a pandemic and we need them for our lives. Otherwise, how are you going to get your food in the shops? Who is going to treat you at the hospital? Who's going to drive you to the hospital? You see, we are being played like a fiddle. And my concern is primarily for the vulnerable, the most vulnerable. And actually the most vulnerable in our society are the children. And what we are leaving for them. And in whose hands their future now rests. In our hands. We brought them into the world. We have a responsibility. And we are at war. This is a war being waged against us, our humanity, in order for a madness, insanity to succeed and take control, so that they can stay in control, so that they can carry on doing what they are doing. And they are evil, they're antiquated, they're living on dead men's dreams and fantasies and applying 21st technology to it. And while we're all locked in our homes, they're rolling out 5G. Again, I will leave you the links to it. I'm not going to go through them all in this video. I will leave you the links, everything that I'm saying here. They're rolling out 5G. Deadly. It's dangerous. It's dangerous to nature. Oh, but it does give them total control over us. We don't want it. Nobody wants it. But they know there will be mass protests when they start rolling it out everywhere, because there's a lot of very intelligent people and professional people, especially among the upper middle classes, who are very concerned about 5G, and they are always the worst threat to the government. Because, you know, the poor and impoverished, they can just brush aside, yeah, ignore those, they're just, you know, waste. They're the waste, the fallout, okay? You don't need to listen to the poor people. But, you know, when you're getting professors speaking out, then it's getting serious. We've also got the 9/11 architects, scientists and engineers now who are bringing the whole thing to court. They want it reinvestigated. They have every right to demand a reinvestigation because the evidence shows conclusively those buildings were blown up. This is a serious threat to these established powers. Because, let's face it, people who have to commit crime in order to get themselves into a position of power and wealth, those people are not in those positions for any good purpose that will serve us. If they've had to kill people and lie and use that to kill even more people, to get even more power and even more money. How much money has the military machine had out of American people? And look at the American people. I despair. I despair when I look at what we have been through in the last 100 years as a species under rule of this same consciousness that to this very day is controlling the banking system and its attitude towards the people. And how it uses this strategy, that strategy, to divide us apart. And now even in the 60s and 70s, it was the division between the adults and the youth, wasn't it? Now it is the division between the elderly that they're pushing. And they're pushing this Schadenfreude mentality. Because it's what they thrive on. How else could they do it? How else could somebody like Boris Johnson stand up and face the public knowing what he's got planned, knowing what they've got planned for us? And that's why, yes, those tax havens with all their trillions in that belong to the crown, it's about time they coughed up. You see? Because under cover of this alleged pandemic, oh yeah, they blamed it, the crash on coronavirus, sorry, not true, another manufactured false flag event. I'm not saying there isn't a new strain of flu, I'm not saying it's not deadly, I'm not saying people aren't dying of it, but what I am saying is that it is not a pandemic. And there has been no reason to lock us in our homes, because it's the same deaths that occur in spike years that have been going on regularly, as is shown by UK Column perfectly here, and as I've shown in previous videos from BBC news reports from previous years. This is what happens, because you get new flu strains, it's constantly mutating, the viruses, and we get spikes. And I'll leave you a video under here that explains exactly why we have these flu viruses within our species, okay? And it is all related to the way that we farm animals. But, you know, the meat and dairy industry, the sugar industry, you know, as I've repeatedly shared with people, if this government was really serious about lessening the flu pandemic, or any flu pandemic from a virus, well, just stop eating sugar. Sugar ought to be a special treat, alright? You're going to eat sugar? Remember that for 4 to 6 hours, your immune system's going to be down, so you take precautions. But, again, that would affect their businesses, wouldn't it? Everything that's good for us is also good for our planet, and everything we the people would like, how we would like to live, is actually good for the planet, but it's bad for them because it will cut down their businesses, it will reduce their power. And this latest banking crash has wiped out all small businesses. That's what's happened, and that is what they've used Brexit to do, and that is a crime, because, you know, we should have had a deal, because we are within the European area, aren't we? Of course we're going to have trade deals with our neighbours, exactly as America has got trade deals with all of South America. But we're being expected to cut off our trade deals even. That is crazy. That's crazy madness. I don't care, like I say, whether you voted Brexit or not. This idea that we're going to cut all trade from Europe and we're going to abandon all our health and safety regulations in order to trade with America. I mean, it just does not compute. What American president would get away with telling Americans that, no, you can't trade with Canada, we're going to lose all our trade deals that we've got with Mexico, instead you're going to get everything from Europe? It's just crazy. It does not make sense. Nothing that they're doing makes sense, except when you look at the money, when you look at their power, when you look at the levels of crimes that they're covering up and hiding. When they're literally facing jail. Ian Duncan Smith, if this general election wasn't rigged for their landslide victory, which I strongly suspect it was, with evidence, Ian Duncan Smith was looking at jail for economic murder. Because how can they justify it? Tell me, how would they, without this pandemic, and there was this big crash and everybody losing their jobs, how could they justify suddenly conjuring up trillions to bail out the failed criminal financial system that they failed to fix because they failed to regulate it after the first crash? It should have had strict regulations to stop it from happening ever again. But no, instead they just even ditched the regulations that they had. So it's actually worse this time. But they can conjure up trillions. These governments, including our government, to bail out these criminals. But nothing for the NHS, nothing for the workforce. Why are we paying taxes, people? Why are we paying taxes? And especially to keep a government going, right? A government that, according to its own, this is the statement from the government. This is from a white paper, right? Government documents, 2 official government documents. They have no legal responsibility for securing our food supplies in an emergency. Neither fire, flood, disease, epidemic, conflict, supply chain disruption or no deal Brexit. What kind of government is that? What is the point of a government? What's the point of a leadership that actually states they have no legal responsibility to provide us food, to make sure we've got food to eat? Why are we paying taxes? What are we doing here, people? Is what we need to be asking. And how they've scared everybody. How repeatedly they've refused to print stories in the press, really serious information that they've refused to print because we don't want to create a panic. But when it suits them, they will literally terrorise people. Have us all pointing fingers and judging each other and being suspicious of one another and afraid even of one another. Keep your distance, keep your distance. What is this? Is it a training exercise? Yes, I know that I get too passionate. But, you know, we're talking about the lives of future generations here, because what we do today will have a huge impact on their future. And if we do nothing, we deserve, as a species, to go to hell if we are going to hand the future over to these monsters. And they are monsters, and we need to recognise that, and we need to understand that intelligence includes compassion. Intelligence is not psychopathic. We were not created as psychopathic beings. Compassion is the head cornerstone of universal law. Compassion, understanding, taking into account. You cannot get a balance unless you take everything into account. And if things are being left off the scales, then you're going to be out of balance if that's the level of justice you're going to live by. And what is the level of justice that we're living by today? Well, the elderly can be thrown away, you know, children can be abused, we'll turn a blind eye to it, you know, rich people can do whatever they like. And these underlying social judgments about, oh, well, you know, people who are suffering and poor and disabled and have a horrible time in this world, it's because they were all bad people in another life. Sorry, that does not compute. And that is not part of Christianity. In fact, Jesus erased exactly that level of thinking. Why do you think he went around healing the sick, feeding the poor, standing up for their rights? We are never going to move forward until we start loving each other. Until we start uniting for the sake of our children. In our independent nations, with our own cultures, which are derived from the environment that we survive in. But they want to impose a new world order. They've got every country. That's the kind of power their money has today. Who is God? There is a God in this world. It's the money, isn't it? I promise to lie for you, to steal, cheat, kill and die for you. Why? Why? What is their money? What purpose is it serving? If it is not serving the good of humanity, if it is not serving the good of our planet, if the people that are controlling it have to commit crime after crime after crime, even abusing children, terrifying them for their pleasure, that is horrific, and that is where we're at today. That is exactly where we are at. And I tell you now, people, clap for yourselves, stand up for your rights, clap for your children, clap for the future. Value one another. Because, and yes, form together, have a goal, have a focus. That is what this is all about. To have a focus on something, stand together, your class action, demand what is yours from this crown that has been robbing us, not just for decades, for centuries. And all their evil, criminal tax havens. We demand compensation from this crown. It has robbed us and now it wants to rob us of our rights and even abused, even our BBC, even our corporate media is serving this crown and not us. And that's a revolution. That's been a revolt against us. And a revolt, when it comes from the top, is called a coup. And that's what we are living in now, a coup. And this coup began the very moment David Cameron entered number 10. This coup has been ongoing. And we need to revolt against the coup. Okay, that is our lawful duty, actually. It is our lawful duty to revolt against criminals in power. For a force of tyranny, because they are a threat, not just to our national security, they are a threat to our global security. And that is a fact. And men like my grandfather gave their lives exactly to fight these kind of fascists. So, you know, thank you for taking time to listen. I hope that my passion and the information that I've shared and the links that I share below, because they're more important. The evidence that I present to you via the links underneath this video is more important than anything that I've said. But I am injecting my human passion into that. And as I've always said, you know, I make my videos, they're totally ad lib after a lot of research that I do, and they are solely for the benefit of humanity and our planet. And obviously I promote and share people that are giving you this information. So please do check it out. And, you know, they've got you on the lockdown. Turn the tables. Use this time now to get an education about what's really been going on while you have been busy, rushed off your feet, struggling to survive in this world, being solely dependent on the BBC for your news. You know, start looking, step outside of the box, people. Really step outside of that box now and take this time. Get informed.